Pastor Matthew Stuckey here, and in this video I'm going to answer the question, were most Jews Zionist before 1900? And the actual answer to that question is no. The vast majority of Jews, for the most part in the last 2,000 years, until the more recent times, have actually been anti-Zionist. And so let me go back to the history behind this. When Jesus was alive, he said that the kingdom was going to be taken from the Jews and given to a nation bringing forth the fruits thereof. And then there was a 7-year war, the Jewish-Roman War from AD 66 to AD 73, and the temple was destroyed right kind of in the midst or the middle of that time period in 70 AD. Now, in the book of James, James actually says to the 12 tribes that were scattered abroad, so even during his time, the tribes had been scattered, but even more so after the destruction of the temple and after that war took place. And, the Jews have been scattered just, everywhere. And what Judaism taught during that time period, because obviously they had rejected Jesus being the Messiah, but they believed in an actual, literal, spiritual Messiah. The modern day Jews don't really believe in a spiritual Messiah. They look at a political Messiah. But back in that day, they actually believed in a literal, spiritual Messiah. But they weren't just teaching that there was going to be one Messiah. They were actually teaching that there were going to be two Messiahs. And they're referred to as Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David. Messiah ben Joseph, referencing the Joseph from the book of Genesis, with the idea being that there's a lot of parallels between the life of Joseph and the Messiah and how he's going to suffer. And so they looked at the picture of Messiah ben Joseph and said that there's going to be a suffering Messiah. Now, how they did not see that that was actually Jesus Christ, I do not know, because obviously Jesus suffered, but they rejected Jesus. And so they believed there's going to be a suffering Messiah, but they also believed in Messiah ben David, who was going to be the Messiah coming to reign. And so what they taught was, before Messiah ben David comes to reign, where he's going to basically promote the Jews and give them back the promised land, the suffering Messiah must come first. And so what Judaism taught, because for the most part over 2,000 years, they were scattered abroad, they didn't really have any power, they got kicked out of countries, and what they were teaching their people to help them cope is basically, hey, we're waiting for the suffering Messiah, and after the suffering Messiah comes, that will usher in the Messiah that's going to bring us to prominence and bring us to reign. And they were not in a position for most of those 2,000 years to have any position of power like you see them have today, where there's a great amount of money and power and influence from modern day Judaism. It wasn't there earlier in the last 2,000 years. So what they were teaching is the suffering Messiah is going to come first, and if we preemptively try to go back to the promised land, it's actually going to bring the curse of God upon us, because we must wait for Messiah ben Joseph to come first. And the idea of actually entering the promised land started to come in the last couple hundred years as they started to get more power and influence, and books were written about that. You have characters such as Theodore Herzl, which is very influential when it comes to them entering into the promised land. And basically the percentage of Jews that were anti-Zionism, which at one time was almost all of them, started to kind of shift, and you started to see more that would promote Zionism because of the fact they actually had the opportunity potentially to go back to the promised land. And so what took place was that you basically had, some that were for it, some that were against it. This all coincides with the time of Adolf Hitler, and you have World War I, you have World War II, and Adolf Hitler wanted to get rid of the Jews. And so basically there was kind of an agreement made between Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany and the Zionist Jews of actually entering into the promised land. And what took place is, for the Jews that rejected that, a lot of them during World War II were just kind of left to slaughter. And as a result of World War II, it really shifted the percentage of the pro-Zionist Jews, because the vast majority of the Jews that died during World War II were actually anti-Zionist. And so the ones that survived for the most part were actually Zionist Jews. And of course, they entered into Israel here today. But even in today's world, there's actually Jews that are against Zionism, and they're against them having the promised land. It's kind of humorous, but you can see videos of Jews holding up signs saying "Free Palestine." And so there are Jews that are actually very anti the Jews that are there, saying the Jews that are in Israel are actually phonies, they're not really religious, they're not true Jews, because they must wait for Messiah ben Joseph to come before Messiah ben David comes and brings them to power. Now, of course, modern day Judaism has completely changed their doctrine, And so they would not believe in, two messiahs. They've kind of just changed everything because they're not particularly spiritual. They might be religious, but they don't actually follow what the Bible says, and they've changed their beliefs from what their religion used to believe completely. Now, don't misunderstand me, because obviously all these Jews are wrong about salvation, because the Messiah already did come. And the thing is, Jesus is the only Messiah. He came to suffer the first time, and he's going to come to reign and rule in power the second time. And of course, even in the Bible, you'll see that his followers and the disciples and the apostles, they're kind of confused about this. King Herod's confused when Jesus is born because, the one who's born King of the Jews has come, but he didn't understand that he wasn't coming to rule and reign the first time. And so Jesus came, he suffered the first time, he's going to come to rule and reign in power the second time. And so there's not two messiahs, there's only one Messiah. But the reason why the vast majority of Jews were against Zionism in the past is they didn't have the opportunity to go to the Promised Land, and because what they were taught religiously is that the Messiah must first come and suffer before we can actually be brought back to power. So it is very interesting to see the shift when you see modern day Judaism that is very pro-Zionism, and now it's not even just Judaism. You see Christianity and other religions that have adopted a pro-Jewish standpoint and a Zionist standpoint. But it's actually not something that's found in the Bible, and even amongst Jews themselves, it was not something they believed for a long time. It's really just kind of a made-up thing that's started a little bit more than 100 years ago, and has just propelled as time went by, especially due to the influence and power and money that the modern day Jews have. Anyways, thank you, and God bless.